the secret oaths, and the secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. This is UCY.tv. I'm your host, Walter Hendricks, coming to you from the Netherlands. 4 p.m. it is here, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And welcome, Jules. Now that you're here, I could retell my story if you like. Especially for you. Yeah, 718-717-8296. If you want to call in, that's awesome. 718-717-8296. So, check out the website, ucy.tv. You will have noticed, if you listened in the amount of time, that except for replays like William Roberts' show, there are no ads. And William Roberts is like years and years ago. And so, there are no ads. So scroll down to the bottom and see if you can find that tiny little donate button and help UCY out. So we can, so UCY can keep on giving you all these different points of view on just about any kind of topic you can find out there. Especially the ones that are interesting. All kinds of hosts. It was a couple of months ago, I guess, but Grimerica has joined, and I did listen to some of them podcasts that they have on their website, and I think they're pretty cool. At least they're not afraid to touch on subjects that you would not hear in the mainstream media. They also had John Anthony West on, who I had on also, by the way. And more of those kind of people that dare stand up to the view held by mainstream scientists, whether it's about Egyptology or whatever. So Jules, you want to hear me retell that story we were talking about in the chat? If you do, let me know. Because I ain't telling it for nothing. The people, most people that listen might have heard it like months ago. So I was thinking of going to the Hunebedden, that's in Dutch anyway. There are a couple of them in the Netherlands, like 50 or so, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. They are stone structures of some kind. I've been to one of the more impressive ones, as in height, and that you can actually see that they put this one boulder on top of another, or somehow it got there. And I took a look at those places where the stone meets the other stone, and there seems to be some kind of mortar or whatever. So I'm not quite sure if that's there from when it was built, or that later technology added that. But it was sure impressive. We should be doing Brave New World, part 10, that is. Good morning, everybody in the chat room at ucy.tv. Check it out, ucy.tv. You find a chat room there. Captain Gringo is there, even twice. Donna, hi, buddy, sister. And Grammy Mary, Grump, Jane, and Joe. Juana and Jules, Matty Clues, welcome buddy, and Solvinur, that will be me, and Vincent. Hi there, how you doing everybody? I saw you again at Media Monarchy. Matty, it's I think a good show that he puts on. It's I don't know what that would be in EST. Monday through Friday, I think it's 12 EST, 9 Pacific, if I'm not mistaken. That you can find him, and I like promoting this guy. Let's see, where is he? He's on my list here. Yep. It's JEP, yep. That will be Mixlr.com, MIXLR, MIX, or X, LR.com/Media Monarchy, James Evan Palato. It's, I got that comment once also when I was making Dutch radio. I was speaking about how bad the situation was. In other words, I was talking symptomology. But I did it in such a way that it wasn't alarming, you know, and so people said, well, it's fine, it's nice to hear somebody explain the dire situation that we are in such a calm voice. And I get that feeling with James Evan Palato also, that he knows how to bring this stuff with a bit of light air, so to speak. I don't know if that's a saying in English or not. But, yeah, it's a nice way of presenting. Let me get another lighter. Let's see. Got one here. Yep. And the coffee, of course. I hope you guys also have something to drink. And you can call in 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296, or you can contact me at Solvinur via Skype. It's SOLVINUR. Also at Solvinur, the number 2 at yahoo.com if you want to email me. Solvinur2@yahoo.com. Alright, so we're almost at the end of Brave New World. I think more, how would you call it, socially engineering bits are still coming. And I think it's chapter 16. We are now at 15. But there you can, I think in 16, we can hear a little bit about how the savage is thinking and how that contrasts with the society that is portrayed in Brave New World as so-called civilized. John Anthony West wouldn't call this, and I'm paraphrasing for him now, right? So don't forget that. Wouldn't consider this society a civilization. He uses the word progress a lot, which is what you hear on the mainstream media. That word is used a lot, progress. He calls it the Church of Progress, this society. And it's rather strange. We had that term thrown at us a while ago via mainstream media also, and in Dutch it's vooruitgang. And the rather strange thing about that is that you can also see it as vooruitgang, which is spelled exactly the same, you only pronounce it a little different. And if I would translate that back literally into English, you get front exit, which of course it doesn't make any sense. Front exit, right? What does that have to do with progress? So no help there. The thing about it is with John Anthony West is why he wouldn't call it a civilized society, is because it's not based on the right thing, so to speak. And the earlier civilizations we've had are more based in the right thing, and we can see that, he says, because of the architectural structure. And there's also a link between music and architecture. In fact, I think it was Goethe, and this also is from John Anthony West. Goethe, think of the book Goethe, Escher, Bach. He said that architecture is frozen music, and this sounds like a metaphor, but John Anthony West says that it's actually not. And it doesn't surprise me, to be honest, because both of these, music and architecture, come back in 7 liberal arts. Those two specifically in the quadrivium, meaning geometry for architecture and music. And so geometry being number in space, and music, or the study of harmony, being number in time, you can see how these two relate, right? Wasn't it Pythagoras who said that number is everything? And that's probably why number is at the basis of everything in the quadrivium. And so, all this study in architecture, there's this cathedral in France, for instance, and apparently we didn't even lose this kind of architecture until the 1700s or thereabouts. This cathedral in France, there's two kind of like tower-like thingies on this, well, what I would call a huge church or whatever. And the sizes of these towers are numbered in such a way that you can actually relate them to the sun and the moon. One is a bit bigger than the other also. And this ties back to the sun and moon worship that was held among the ancients. So you see that even coming back into 15th, 16th, 13th century Western cathedral buildings, there are these proportions in there that suggest a high knowledge of number theory. All right? And the strangest thing that I've come across lately regarding that, maybe I can get I've got his name on my notes here, I'm not sure, I don't think so. Randall Carlson is one of them, but let me check if I can find his name very quickly here. No, I don't think so. I'll have to maybe I'll remember it during the show. Not Marty Leeds, who's also interesting in this case to check out with numbers. Marty Leeds. I think best known as Marty Leeds 33. But there's this other guy. He's an architect, and he was explaining about this church that I just told you about. But not only about the church, also about the measure that they take for measuring the church. You can take, like, for instance, a meter, like we here in the Netherlands do, but you could also use foot and inches, and so there's different kinds of measuring you can do, up to what is it in Dutch? We call it zeemijl. The sea is involved there. I think you guys call it nautical mile. And when you measure distances between the places where these structures stand, or even have stood in the past, like this needle, for instance, in Cleopatra's Needle, which stood in Egypt. I don't remember which city now exactly. Maybe Heliopolis, but I'm not quite sure about that name at all, to be honest with you, because it sounds more Greek-like. But it was standing there, and then later it was moved to London. I think it was in the 13th century. And that distance gives you a number that's repeating, something like 3,333 kilometers. And these numbers, they keep coming back. Same with 666, for instance. Like the distance, not the distance, the speed at which the Earth travels around the sun is 66,600 miles per second. And there's also this strange correlation between sixes and fives when using feet and inches. I think it was something like, you'd have to check this, you know, I'm doing this off the top of my head. I think it was something like 660 feet is 5,550 inches, or something like that. And so these strange number sequences keep appearing of a repeating number, like 333. Yeah. If you divide 1 by the numericals of the speed of light, you also get a whole bunch of zeros and then 333. And speed of light is, by the way, also used nowadays to discern how long 1 meter is. 1 meter used to come from this seemingly, and I'm stressing the word seemingly here, arbitrary notion of the distance from the equator to the North Pole being 10,000 kilometers. That's supposedly how we got the meter. Now, I don't know if that's arbitrary or not. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how to explain this. But the circumference of the Earth turns out to be 40,000 and then 77 kilometers. So you know those last 77 kilometers are like a small fraction, right? A small percentage off from the exact 40,000 kilometer circumference. Does that make any sense? And so there's way more of these so-called coincidences. The radius of the moon is 1,080 miles. The radius of the sun is... Now I'm doing this out of the top of my head, but it doesn't matter number-wise anyway. It's either the radius or the diameter. It's 864,000 miles. Now that number 108 and 604, they belong to the same sequence. There's this number sequence. It starts with 27, as far as I got from this person that had told me anyway. Maybe it goes even further down, so to speak, because you can do this both ways. So you start with 27 and you double it, and so you get 54, you double that, you get the 108. I told you months and months and years ago about that number 108, remember? Now you see that it's tied to the moon. You double that, you get 416, you double that, you get, 216, 108 doubled is 216, you double that, you get 432. If you double that, you get 864. So you see, it's in the same sequence, just as a Fibonacci sequence, which you also keep seeing repeated in nature. I think there's 2 of them, even, or more, but at least 2 that I know of. And these Fibonacci sequence, if you take, so, for instance, 2 numbers, like we got 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so on. If you take, for instance, the 5 and the 8, or the 8 and the 13, and you divide them, you start approximating the phi ratio, which is 1.61802. So 1.618 will do. 0.618 is also that. And the further you go along this Fibonacci sequence, the more accurate the approximation to the phi ratio gets. And this is how nature grows. This is how trees keep their balance while growing. Or these kind of enormous horns on animals. They also grow in such a way that the animal has no problem whatsoever in his whole life adjusting to this growing mass on its head. And it doesn't even notice that because of the natural way that it grows, and it doesn't shift its gravitational point. Why am I always grabbing the wrong The wrong lighter. Let's put this one over there. This one works. So you can call in 718-717-8296. Jane in the chat room says Cleopatra's Needle is the popular name for each of 3 ancient Egyptian obelisks re-erected in London, Paris, and New York City during the 19th century. Yeah, there were more. I think there was also one in Rome that was brought there, Jane. I think there's one in Jerusalem that was brought there. Yeah. Yeah. These obelisks are usually a phallic symbol representing regeneration, generation or regeneration. I think in this context the word regeneration is better because these people thought in cycles. You know, we as Western people, we're stuck in, I'm seriously about that word stuck. We're stuck in a linear kind of thinking when using time. And we like to think of time as linear, but it's in the older days, people thought of time as being cyclical or circular. And of course, this cyclical idea comes back in the way our solar system works. And the solar system with the Earth and the Moon are the tools that we used to get an idea of time. Right? They didn't for nothing build these stone structures in such a way that you could tell the summer solstice and the winter solstice. Those are time-related events, you see. So it's no wonder that they saw time as cyclical. Do you understand? And Juana says there's one in Vatican City, the City of London, and Washington, D.C., and that's indeed correct. You can all check that via Google Earth. And the astonishing thing about that little triangle is that these are places which are cities within cities. Yeah, Vatican City is not a part of Italy. And the City of London is not a part of London, the city. It's not a part of Britain. It's a separate state. And same goes for Washington, D.C. It's not a part of the United States, as far as I know. So these are all separate states where they drag these enormous pillars to. Yeah, Adele says in the chat something about my lighters. Yeah. See, this one doesn't work, but you know, maybe there's some dirt in it or something. But these are refillables, so I'll put it away, but probably usable. I've got this flask here. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's gas in there. You can refill them. It's a cheap way to get my cigarettes going again. Yeah, you want city-states. Yeah. That's another idea that comes out of that. And then Dale says the alignment of pyramids is another story. Yeah, that's and also the placement, the place that they occupy seems to be very important. I haven't been able to check this myself because I don't have the tools nor the necessary skills to do this checking. But in this video that this guy whose name I still can't remember presented, he what did he do? He took the Earth and related it somehow to the pyramid. All right, so that's not something specially new, right? There's more people that have correlated the Sphinx, not the Sphinx. That's another story, by the way, which I would like to get into, also from John Anthony West. But this pyramid of Giza, and he's an architect, and he can see more figures in there somehow, and he sees a square also in this pyramid, and when he supersedes this square over the Earth and makes the line of the top of the square align with the position of the Giza, there's this odd proportion that happens. And I think it's the number pi that comes out of that. And he does this with other structures as well, that these odd numbers keep popping up because of the placements of these structures on the Earth itself. Dale says, Walter, there were studies, the pyramids were geo-coded, and they found new ones with that math. Yeah. Wouldn't surprise me at all. That's why I wanted to tell you about this Sphinx story. Maybe you probably heard it before, but it's so stunning in a sense. And it's about this Sphinx. And John Anthony West, I'm going to try and tell it as he does it. He was there, and he's not a geologist, but he's there. He's interested in Egypt, and he's read these hieroglyphs on not only tablets but also paper, apparently. And there is named the reign of the kings that they had and how long they would reign and stuff like that. And if you take what it says there literally, their history goes back around 34,000 years, right? So take that in contrast with what is it? The 3,500, 5,000 years or so that, the mainstream scientists will accept as dating for these cultures, these pyramids. And John explains that if you come to the scientific society with these old tablets and old papers, they won't accept that, However, he says, when I was walking around the Sphinx, I noticed that the enclosure in which the Sphinx is standing, and probably the Sphinx itself also, I'm not quite sure about that, by the way, but surely the place in which it is encased, from which it was dug out, actually, has been submitted to heavy watering. But, he explains, I'm not a geologist, right? So luckily then, his friend who I also had on the show, and I can't remember his name, which annoys me very much. But he was an expert on it. And he says, well, these effects in the stone are clearly from water. This is from rainfall. And later on there were two other geologists that came to the same conclusion. And this led to a 7-year, this was somewhere around in the 90s or so, this led to a 7-year a kind of battle between John Anthony and his friend and a few others, I suppose. And what was then, and still now, the established science of Egyptology. Right, so, however, if we take into account what John Anthony West says, that the structures have been subjected to water erosion, then these structures must have been at least 5,000 years older, about 5,500 years older, than the 5,000 that is about claimed by the quackademics, as John Anthony West calls them. Right, so this watering had to have happened around the time when, this is also one important aspect of it, the Sphinx, which is actually a lion, was looking at his own image in the sky at, what would it have been, solstice, sunrise, I don't know exactly what, that was, but it's at that time that the lion in the sky is a significant constellation, which of course ties to the Sphinx on the ground. Right? Whenever you're studying these structures, you have to take into account the sky also. And so, if you take into account the erosion that the stones must have been under, and you take into account the symbolic meaning of the Sphinx and its relation into the time, then you come to a date of about 10,500 BC. However, in that period, we are just recovering from an enormous happening, which is called the end of the last ice age. And that was a period of such major upheaval that it is logically easier to accept that it was not the Sphinx looking at his own picture in the sky, Leo, 10,500 years ago, but one great year longer. And then you get the figure 36,000 years ago, which about coincides with the history as it was written by the ancient Egyptians themselves when it comes to their kings and how long they reigned. They go back about 32,000, 34,000 years. So these things could be at least 36,000 years old. Isn't that amazing? I'm thinking that the pyramids must have been built around that time also. And when you take a look at, for instance, the markings that have been left by later cultures, you get the idea that these later cultures were responsible for the whole building, but that was not correct. There is this statue in the Cairo museum. It's a black statue, a black, I think, goddess. No, it's a god. I think it's a god. Whatever. It's so perfectly polished, it's unbelievable. And it's made of some very hard material. I think it was 8 or 9 on the scale. I'm not quite sure. So that's a red flag in itself. You know, how did they polish this stuff? But the second thing that is on this statue, on the sidings, you can see hieroglyphs cut into them. And the point is that the inside of these hieroglyphs are not polished, which suggests that these hieroglyphs were put in there at a later date. Because if you're going to make the statue and you're going to polish it, that's your plan, right? Wouldn't you first cut out the hieroglyphs and then polish it? Right? You wouldn't like polish it and then start cutting it again, right? You understand? So this all suggests that these artifacts are much older. Much, much older. I think it was Anthony West that said, if you go to the Museum of Cairo, they should have called it the Museum of Red Flags. Because there are so many things there that you can see that, you know, there's no way that these people could have made it with the tools that mainstream science is trying to shove down our throats that they had to work with. Like copper chisel, what do you call it? Not chisel, but something like that. You know, these like Stone Age tools, right? There's no way that you could create the art with which is presented there in the Cairo. All right, let me see. You can call in 718-717-8296. I do have Brave New World open in case I'm rambled out. Blah, blah. Did I finish the story about John Anthony West and what he calls a civilization? Well, this is more of a end of that. You know, it's the civilizations that were after the Ice Age, but possibly before the Ice Age, that had knowledge of not only our solar system, but they seem to encode in the structures the radiuses of not only Earth, but also Sun and Moon. And I'm glad to hear that John Anthony West at least rejects the idea of ancient aliens. I think that's an insult to ourselves, indeed. You know, we've been running around this globe with the intellectual capacity that we have for about 200,000 years. So, you know, there's enough potential in the human race to do what we did, you know, thousands of years ago. I think John also rejected the idea that they had an industrial base. I would agree with that. However, there are some artifacts which are kind of hard to explain without the use of at least some kind of industrial base tool, like a drill or whatever, you know. I tend to agree with him, though, that they didn't have this industrial base. There is this unanswered question that needs to be answered in regards to this. It's the fact that all these magnificent pieces of wall paintings and things that they did there, how did they actually do that with in the darkness there, you know? You can call in Dell if you want. That's possible. Yep. Let me type it in the chat. 8296 718-717-8296 if you want to call in. So these paintings that are like deep in the pyramids and so exquisite, it's unbelievable. How did they do this? You know, John Anthony West says that they didn't use torches because these torches would have left the soot, and there isn't. You know, there isn't evidence of them using torches. And he says they also didn't use electricity. You know, I know there's this story out there on the internet, and they said, look here, there's this box, and there seems to be a cord going to this lamp-like structure, which is held up, and, you know, this is a lamp. They had light, right? So, no, actually, that's not now why can't I add this? I'm supposed to be having a window where I can actually answer this call. Why is it not there? Jumpa. Alright, so I didn't get this window here. This one by. I'm supposed to be able to add this to the Skype call, right? No. I can't. I don't know what's going on, Jules, but it's fracked. Blah. Yeah. I don't know what it is. Alright, I'm back. I'm sorry about that, guys. Maybe it's the magic jack, he says, that's responsible for not me being able to answer the phone. I do have the lines. Maybe you want to call in 718-717-8296. Normally if that happens, you know, I get this option that I can add you to the call, but it didn't happen this time. So, let's see, what time is it? 10 minutes to 5. Well, that's in the Netherlands. It's 10:50 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yeah. Yep. Hold on, guys. I'm drinking my almost cold coffee here. Yeah, well, I had it updated, you know, Skype, so it should be working. Anyway, older cultures. The Indian mythology is also full of them. And there's stories in the Mahabharata, apparently. And I've read some of them myself, not specifically the terms that I'm going to talk about now, but similar. And they talk about weapons, and they come across as weapons of mass destruction. You know, that's about the idea that you get light of 1,000 suns and descriptions like that. And I'm still not quite sure what to make of that. It could be exaggeration. I don't know. I'm having a tough call. So no, it's not working either with you. We go again. Something's messed up with the phones, guys. I'm sorry about that. It's not working. Not today, anyway. Let's see, click this away. I'm sorry about this, guys. Click that away. Bye-bye. Yeah, so it's not giving me add to conversation button. Damn it. Stupid Skype. So I do, about these stories about the ancient cultures, I do think we can take away a lot from them, though, when it comes to science. Especially since they seem to have had grasp of proportion and harmonics. Music comes back again. The role vibrations or sound plays in nature. There's these whole experiments you can do with, for instance, a metal plate which you can attach to a violin, for instance, and place you could even use fluids, but also sand, will do. And you create these, an A or a C or whatever on the violin, or even a song. Then the sand will move into these geometric structures. And it seems that sound or vibration, whatever you want to call it, is a prerequisite, I guess, for the creation of forms. And, it's related to the idea of the Bible, where it says in the beginning was the Word. And it just struck me that word and world are actually only one letter apart. In Dutch, it doesn't work like that. It's a bit too much off, I would say. But in ancient India, you got the same idea. There they claim that the sound of AUM, also known as OHM, is what set the whole creation in motion. These people also were thinking cyclically, right? So remember, we think of time as being linear. this is probably due to the idea that in our scientific society-minded view of the world, we think of action-reaction. And that's where we get the idea of linear time from. But as I told you in the first hour, I gave you a good example of why we could be thinking in circular time, in repeating time. Something like that. Cyclical time. Cycles. And there's too many things going in cycles, so to speak. You know, maybe time does that too. I'm still having a hard time grasping the idea of time anyway. The idea is also represented in these ancient structures. I think it's Puma Kunte. I'm not quite sure about the name, but it's in South America. And there is this place which has like elevations. It's like a 6x5 place. I think the ratio is 6x5. That comes from that guy whose name I still can't remember. But he says that ratio 6x5 comes back all the time. And at this place, in this area, which could be defined as a 6x5, there are all these kinds of elevations. And one is called for the moon, and another is called for the sun. And there's this other person that did all these investigations into the distances of these things, and later he found out that the height of these things is also important, but that the whole structure was actually one dimension up from what we would normally perceive. And so he says, when they let us know about a certain distance, they are actually talking about a plane. When they let us know about a plane, they are actually letting us know about a cube. And when, or a what do you call that? Triangle, that basic triangle, tetrahedron or something, or a cube, or a sphere, you know, it doesn't matter, something 3D. When they present us with something 3D, like the elevations I mentioned, they're actually talking about time. And this brings us to the idea of a hypercube. If you type that into Google, hypercube, you can probably find some little video that shows you this cube within a cube that seems to be able to move in and out of itself. And that's a visual representation of the fourth dimension, as it is then called, right? Time. So it's probably not strange that I can't get a grasp of the notion of time, because it's out of our senses, so to speak. You know, we got 3 dimensions we can work with easily. You know, those are graspable. But the fourth seems to be elusive or something. At least to me. I don't know how you guys think about that. So, it's almost the top of the hour. As you have noticed, there hasn't been any interruption by ads. So go to ucy.tv and scroll all the way to the bottom. You got $2 left or so. Donate that so UCY can stay on the air. We're gonna do some music, guys. It's break time. Top of the hour. Poker face. Here we go. Hold on, guys. Yeah, blah, blah. Put this there. Alright, everybody, welcome back. This is UCY.TV with the Solvinur Event. I'm the host, Walter, coming to you from the Netherlands. It's 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Check out the website UCY.TV, rlmradio.xyz for some alternative, or actually underground radio. Yeah, I got my new coffee, Jane. Yeah, it's a little break. I barely made it to make some coffee. Yeah, it's always Poker Face that's played here. So, let's see. Let's get into Brave New World. Let's see if you can finish this today. Probably not, but this is the Savage going to speak. I think this is just after or at, I don't know. Remember you guys when he was at this place where the Soma was being dished out? And I think he took some action. He says, "But do you like being slaves?" the savage was saying as he entered the hospital. His face was flushed. His eyes bright with ardor and indignation. "Do you like being babies?" "Yes, babies, mewling and puking," he added, exasperated by their bestial stupidity into throwing insults at those he had come to save. The insult bounced off their carapace of thick stupidity. They stared at him with a blank expression of dull and sullen resentment in their eyes. "Yes, puking," he fairly shouted. Grief and remorse, compassion and duty, all were forgotten now, and, as it were, absorbed into an intense, overpowering hatred of these less-than-human monsters. "Don't you want to be free and men? Don't you even understand what manhood and freedom are?" Rage was making him fluent. The words came easily, in a rush. "Don't you?" he repeated, but got no answer to his question. "Very well then," he went on grimly. "I'll teach you. I'll make you be free whether you want it or not." And pushing open a window that looked on to the inner court of the hospital, he began to throw the little pill boxes of soma tablets in handfuls out into the area. For a moment, the khaki mob was silent, petrified at the spectacle of this wanton sacrilege, with amazement and horror. "He's mad," whispered Bernard, staring with wide-open eyes. "They'll kill him. They'll—" A great shout suddenly went up from the mob. A wave of movement drove it menacingly towards the savage. "Ford, help him," said Bernard, and averted his eyes. "Ford helps those who help themselves," and with a laugh, actually a laugh of exultation, Helmholtz Watson pushed his way through the crowd. "Free, free!" the savage shouted. And with one hand continued to throw the soma into the area, while with the other he pushed the indistinguishable faces of his assailants. He pushed, he punched. "Free!" And suddenly there was Helmholtz at his side. Good old Helmholtz, also punching. Men at last, and in the interval also throwing the poison out by handfuls through the open window. Yes, men. Men. And there was no more poison left. He picked up the cash box and showed them its black emptiness. "You're free." Howling, the Deltas charged with a redoubled fury. Hesitant on the fringes of the battle. "They're done for," said Bernard, and, urged by a sudden impulse, ran forward to help them. Then thought better of it and halted. Then, ashamed, stepped forward again. Then again thought better of it, and was standing in an agony of humiliated indecision, thinking that they might be killed if he didn't help them, and that he might be killed if he did, when, Ford be praised, goggle-eyed and swine-snouted in their gas masks, in ran the police. Bernard dashed to meet them. He waved his arms, and it was action. He was doing something. He shouted, "Help!" several times, more and more loudly, so as to give himself the illusion of helping. "Help! Help!" The policemen pushed him out of the way and got on with their work. 3 men were with spraying machines buckled to their shoulders, pumped thick clouds of soma vapor into the air. 2 more were busy round the portable synthetic music box, carrying water pistols charged with a powerful anesthetic. 4 others had pushed their way into the crowd and were methodically laying out, squirt by squirt, the more ferocious of the fighters. "Quick," yelled Bernard. "They'll be killed if you don't hurry." Annoyed by his chatter, one of the policemen had given him a shot from his water pistol. Bernard stood for a second or two, wobbling unsteadily on legs that seemed to have lost their bones, their tendons, their muscles, to have become mere sticks of jelly, and at last not even jelly water. He tumbled in a heap on the floor. Suddenly, from out the synthetic music box, a voice began to speak. The voice of reason, the voice of good feeling. The soundtrack roll was unwinding itself in synthetic anti-riot speech number 2, medium strength. Straight from the depth of non-existent heart. My friends, said the voice so pathetically, with a note of such infinitely tender reproach that, behind their gas masks, even the policemen's eyes were momentarily dimmed with tears. "What's the meaning of this? Why aren't you all being happy and good together?" "Happy and good," the voice repeated. At peace, at peace." It trembled, sank into a whisper, and momentarily expired. "Oh, I do want you to be happy," it began, with a yearning earnestness. "I do so want you to be good. Please, be good." 2 minutes later, the voice and the soma vapor had produced their effect. In tears, the deltas were kissing and hugging one another, 6 twins at a time, in comprehensive embrace. Even Helmholtz and the Savage were almost crying. A fresh supply of pillboxes was brought in from the bursary, a new distribution was hastily made, and, to the sound of the voice, the voice is Ricuy, R-I-C-U-Y, I don't know what that is, affectionate baritone valedictions, the twins dispersed, blubbering as though their hearts would break. "Goodbye, my dearest friends, Ford keep you. Goodbye, dearest friends." When the last of the deltas had gone, the policeman switched off the current. The angelic voice fell silent. "Will you come quietly?" asked the sergeant, "or must we anesthetize?" He pointed his water pistol menacingly. "Oh, we'll come quietly," the Savage answered, dabbling alternately a cut lip, a scratched neck, and a bitten left hand. Still keeping his handkerchief to his bleeding nose, Helmholtz nodded in confirmation. Awake and having recovered the use of his legs, Bernard had chosen this moment to move as inconspicuously as he could towards the door. "Hi, you there," called the sergeant, and the swine-masked policeman hurried across the room and laid a hand on the young man's shoulder. Bernard turned with an expression of indignant innocence. Escaping? He hadn't dreamed of such a thing. "Though, what on earth you want me for?" he said to the sergeant. "I really can't imagine." "You're a friend of the prisoner, aren't you?" "Well," said Bernard, and hesitated. No, he really couldn't deny it. "Why shouldn't I be?" he asked. "Come on then," said the sergeant, and led the way towards the door and the waiting police car. That was the end of 15. At 17:15 Dutch time. Didn't even mention the date at the top of the at the beginning of the show, did I? It's the 20th of August, 2016, and we are at chapter 16. Yeah. Coffee. There's coffee in the text here also. The room in which the three were ushered was the controller's study. His fourth ship will be down in a moment. The Gamma butler left them to themselves. Helmholtz laughed aloud. "It's more like a caffeine solution party than a trial," he said, and let himself fall into the most luxurious and pneumatic armchairs. "Cheer up, Bernard," he added, catching sight of his friend's green, unhappy face. But Bernard would not be cheered. Without answering, without even looking at Helmholtz, he went and sat down on the most uncomfortable chair in the room, carefully chosen in the obscure hope of somehow depreciating the wrath of the higher powers. The savage, meanwhile, wandered restlessly around the room, peering with a vague, superficial inquisitiveness at the books in the shelves, and the soundtrack rolls and the reading machine bobbins in their numbered pigeonholes. On the table, under the window, lay a massive volume bound in limp black leather surrogate and stamped with large golden T's. He picked it up and opened it. "My Life and Work by Our Ford." The book had been published at Detroit by the Society for the Propagation of Fordian Knowledge. Idly he turned the pages, read a sentence here and there, a paragraph there, and had just come to the conclusion that that book didn't interest him when the door opened, and the resident world controller for Western Europe walked briskly into the room. Mustafa Mond shook hands with all three of them, but it was to the savage that he addressed himself. "So, you don't much like civilization, Mr. Savage," he said. The savage looked at him. He had been prepared to lie, to bluster, to remain sullenly unresponsive, but, reassured by the good-humored intelligence of the controller's face, he decided to tell the truth, straightforwardly. No, he shook his head. Bernard started and looked horrified. What would the controller think? To be labeled as a friend of a man who said that he didn't like civilization, said it openly, and, of all people, to the controller. It was terrible. "But John," he began. A look from Mustafa Mond reduced him to an abject silence. "Of course," the savage went on to admit, "there are some very nice things. All that music in the air, for instance. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about my ears, and sometimes voices." The savage's face lit up with a sudden pleasure. "Have you read it too?" he asked. "I thought nobody knew about that book here in England." "Almost nobody. I'm one of the very few. It's prohibited, you see." "But as I make the laws here, I can also break them. With impunity, Mr. Marx," he added, turning to Bernard, "which I'm afraid you can't do." Bernard sank into a yet more hopeless misery. "But why is it prohibited?" asked the savage. In the excitement of meeting a man who had read Shakespeare, he had momentarily forgotten everything else. The controller shrugged his shoulders. Because it's old. That's the chief reason. We haven't any use for old things here. Even when they're beautiful? Particularly when they're beautiful. Beauty's attractive, and we don't want people to be attracted by old things. We want them to like new ones. But the new ones are so stupid and horrible. These plays, where there's nothing but helicopters flying about, and you feel like people, and you feel the people kissing. He made a grimace. Goats and monkeys. Only in Othello's word could he find the adequate vehicle for his contempt and hatred. Nice tame animals anyhow, the controller murmured parenthetically. Why don't you let them see Othello instead? I've told you, it's old. Besides, they couldn't understand it. Yes, that was true. He remembered how Helmholtz had laughed at Romeo and Juliet. Well then, he said after a pause, something new that's like Othello, and that they could understand. That's what we've all been wanting to write, said Helmholtz, breaking a long silence. Yeah. So, the Lion King, that movie, it mirrors also the story of Osiris, where Osiris is killed and his child sent into exile. And the story of brothers at war comes back more, also in the Bible with Cain and Abel, also in the Mahabharata with Arjuna and his 4 brothers, and the Kuru family, and those two are also related. So a lot of these mythologies have war with brothers in them. I think the Icelandic Edda also has that element in it. Continuing, and it's what you never will write, said the controller, because if it were really like Othello, nobody could understand it, however new it might be. And if it were new, it couldn't possibly be like Othello. Why not? Yes, why not? Helmholtz repeated. He too was forgetting the unpleasant realities of the situation. Green with anxiety and apprehension, only Bernard remembered them. The others ignored him. Why not? Because our world is not the same as Othello's world. You can't make flivvers without steel, and you can't make tragedies without social instability. The world's stable now. People are happy. They get what they want, and they never want what they can't get. They're well off. They're safe. They're never ill. They're not afraid of death. They're blissfully ignorant of passion and old age. They're plagued with no mothers or fathers. They've got no wives or children or lovers to feel strongly about. They're so conditioned that they practically can't help behaving as they ought to behave. And if anything should go wrong, there's Soma, which you go and chuck out the window in name of liberty, Mr. Savage. Liberty. He laughed. Expecting deltas to know what liberty is, and now expecting them to understand Othello? My good boy. The Savage was silent for a while. All the same, he insisted obstinately. Othello's good. Othello's better than those feelies. Of course it is, the controller agreed. But that's the price we have to pay for stability. You've got to choose between happiness and what people used to call high art. We've sacrificed the high art. We have the feelies and the sand organ instead. Yeah. So that's what's happening today. Also, in architecture, the high arts are no longer present. In art itself, also, some of it is like aesthetically pleasing, but it doesn't have an effect on you that the more ancient art will have. The more ancient art is much more impressive. I think that's because they had a better understanding of nature. I've said this before, and apparently this is a quote-unquote religious saying, or whatever you want to call it. But art is supposed to reflect reality. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to reflect nature. And so architecture also should, take those rules and live by them, but they don't. And that's why you get lifeless structures. Continuing. But they don't mean anything. They mean themselves. They mean a lot of agreeable sensations to the audience. But they're told by an idiot. The controller laughed. You're not being very polite to your friend, Mr. Watson, one of our most distinguished emotional engineers. But he's right, said Helmholtz gloomily, because it is idiotic, writing when there's nothing to say. Precisely, but that requires the most enormous ingenuity. You're making slivers out of the absolute minimum of steelworks of art, of practically nothing but pure sensation. The savage shook his head. It all seems to me quite horrible. Of course it does. Actual happiness always looks pretty squalid in comparison with the overcompensations for misery. And, of course, stability isn't nearly so spectacular as instability. And being contented has none of the glamour of a good fight against misfortune, none of the picturesqueness of a struggle with temptation, or a fatal overthrow by passion or doubt. Happiness is never grand. I suppose not, said the savage after a silence. But need it be quite so bad, But need it be quite so bad as those twins? He passed his hand over his eyes as though he were trying to wipe away the remembered image of those long rows of identical midgets at assembling tables, those queued-up twin herds at the entrance to the Brentford monorail stations, those human maggots swarming round Linda's bed of death, the endlessly repeated face of his assailants. He looked at his bandaged left hand and shuddered. Horrible. But how useful? I see you don't like our Bokanovsky groups, but I assure you they're the foundation on which everything else is built. They're the gyroscope that stabilizes the rocket plane of state on its unswerving course. Yeah, that would be us, the working people. We are the Bokanovsky group. The deep voice thrillingly vibrated. The gesticulating hand implied all space and the onrush of the irresistible machine. Mustafa Mon's oratory was almost up to synthetic standards. I was wondering, said the savage, why you had them at all, seeing that you can get whatever you want out of those bottles. Why don't you make everybody an alpha double plus while you're about it? Mustafa Mont laughed. Because we have no wish to have our throats cut, he answered. Yeah. So this is like an allegory, at least to me it is. These last past sentences is like an allegory of occulted knowledge. Why don't we make everybody a double plus? Because we don't want to get our throats cut. Because, if they told us about the knowledge that the ruling class is using against us, we would probably cut their throats. Yeah. Continuing. We believe in happiness and stability. The society of alphas couldn't fail to be unstable and miserable. Imagine a factory staffed by alphas, that is to say, by separate and unrelated individuals of good heredity and conditioned so as to be capable, within limits, of making a free choice and assuming responsibilities. Imagine it, he repeated. The savage tried to imagine it, not very successfully. It's an absurdity. An alpha-decanted, alpha-conditioned man would go mad if he had to do epsilon semi-moron work, go mad, or start smashing things up. Alphas can be completely socialized, but only on a condition that you make them do alpha work. Alright, so this is talking about a caste system. Did you hear, and you can still at the end of the show, you can hear Huxley talking about humans arranged in a scientific caste system. Those are the words that he uses. Listen to it at the top of, not at the top, at the beginning of the show and at the end of the show. I got this mix of a couple of people. Churchill and Clinton. But also Aldous Huxley. You can hear him say it. This is what he sees happening. A scientific caste system. And that's what this is about also in the book. Only an epsilon can be expected to make epsilon sacrifices for the good reason that for him they aren't sacrifices. They're the line of the least resistance. His conditioning has laid down rails along which he's got to run. He can't help himself. He's foredoomed. Even after decanting, he's still inside a bottle, and invisible, bottle of infantile and embryonic fixations. Each one of us, of course, the controller meditatively continued, goes through life inside a bottle, But if we happen to be alphas, our bottles are, relatively speaking, enormous. We should suffer acutely if we were confined in a narrower space. You cannot pour upper-cost champagne surrogate into lower-cost bottles. It's obviously theoretically. It's obvious theoretically, but it has also been proved in actual practice. The result of the Cyprus experiment was convincing. What was that? Asked the savage. Mustafa Mond smiled. Hold on, guys. Blah, blah. Drinking some coffee. Well, you can call it an experiment in rebottling, if you like. It began in AF 473. The controllers had the island of Cyprus cleared of all its existing inhabitants and recolonized with a specially prepared batch of 22,000 alphas. All agricultural and industrial equipment was handed over to them, and they were left to manage their own affairs. The result exactly fulfilled all the theoretical predictions. That's probably predictions. The land wasn't properly worked. There were strikes in all the factories. The laws were set at naught, orders disobeyed. All the people detailed for a spell of low-grade work were perpetually intriguing for high-grade jobs, and all the people with high-grade jobs were counter-intriguing at all costs to stay where they were. Within 6 years, they were having a first-class civil war. When 19 out of 20,000 had been killed, the survivors unanimously petitioned the world controllers to resume the government of the island, which they did. And that was the end of the only society of alphas that the world has ever seen. The savage sighed profoundly. The optimum population, said Mustafa Mond, is modeled on the iceberg 1/9 below the waterline, 1/9 above. And they're happy below the waterline? Happier than above it? Happier than your friend here, for example, he pointed, in spite of that awful work? Awful? They don't find it so. On the contrary, they like it. It's light, it's childishly simple, no strain on the mind or the muscles, 7.5 hours of mild, unexhausting labor, and then the soma ration and games and unrestricted copulation and the fees. What more could they ask for? True, he added, they might ask for shorter hours. And of course we could give them shorter hours. Technically it would be perfectly simple to reduce all lower cost working hours to 3 or 4 a day. But would they be any happier for that? No, they wouldn't. The experiment was tried more than a century and a half ago. The whole of Ireland was put on a 4-hour day. What was the result? Unrest and a large increase in the consumption of soma. That was all. Those 3.5 hours of extra leisure were so far from being a source of happiness that people felt constrained to take a holiday from them. Yeah, take a holiday means take soma, right? Dumb down your consciousness, like today we would do with alcohol. In fact, it's the lack of leisure time. Well, maybe not even the lack of leisure time. You know, Western society, people think it's normal to work 40 hours a week. I think that's insane. I think it's absolutely insane. People in the Stone Age, they work like four hours a day, about 4 hours a day, 2 to 4 hours a day of work, you know. And you're telling me that with all the technology that we have, we must work 40 hours a week, that's 8 hours a day, to be able to survive, you know, because if you don't, you know, you're going to get thrown out of your house. Does that sound like progress to you? Just compared to the people of the Stone Age? Do we still have those people around, you know, in some areas? They don't work much. They work 2 to 4 hours a day. So, you know, but even if you work 8 hours a day, there's still time in the evening when you come home to do your own fracking research, right? But, you know, that's not what's going on. Entertainment is taking over and making sure that your mind does not start thinking. That's what you're supposed to be doing with leisure time. Start thinking. Hold on, guys. All right, where were we? The Inventions Office is stuffed with plans for labor-saving processes. Thousands of them. Mustafa Mond made a lavish gesture. And why don't we put them into execution? For the sake of the laborers. It would be sheer cruelty to afflict them with excessive leisure. It's the same with agriculture. We could synthesize every morsel of food if we wanted to, but we don't. We prefer to keep a third of the population on the land, for their own sakes, because it takes longer to get food out of the land than out of a factory. Besides, we have our stability to think of. We don't want to change. Every change is a menace to stability. That's another reason why we're so chary of applying new inventions. Yeah. So it says here, every change is a menace to stability. So that's not true if you take a look at what nature is doing, right? If you see a tree growing, let's say from a seed to a huge oak, you're talking immense changes, yet the stability of the tree never suffers from it, you see? Maybe a tree is not a good example because a tree, you know, it screams stability just by its nature, but it has to do with the way nature works. It's the golden ratio idea, the Fibonacci sequence idea, which when growing, or one could say, in other words, when adding the fourth dimension, time, when changing, right, does not affect the stability. Continuing, every discovery in pure science is potentially subversive. Even science must sometimes be treated as a possible enemy. Yes, even science. Science? The savage frowned. He knew the word, but what it exactly signified he could not say. Shakespeare and the old men of the Pueblo had never mentioned science. And from Linda he had only gathered the vaguest hints. Science was something you made helicopters with. Some things that caused you to laugh at the corn dances. Something that prevented you from being wrinkled and losing your teeth. He made a desperate effort to take the controller's meaning. Yes, Mustafa Mond was saying, that's another item in the cost of stability. It isn't only art that's incompatible with happiness. It's also science. Science is dangerous. We have to keep it most carefully chained and muzzled. What? Said Helmholtz in astonishment. But we're always saying that science is everything. It's a hypnopathic platitude. 3 times a week between 13 and 17, put in Bernard. And all the science propaganda we do at the college. Yes, but what sort of science? Asked Mustafa Mond sarcastically. You've had no scientific training, so you can't judge. I was a pretty good physicist in my time. Too good. Good enough to realize that all our science is just a cookery book, with an orthodox theory of cooking that nobody's allowed to question. And a list of recipes that mustn't be added to except by special permission from the head cook. And I'm the head cook now. But I was an inquisitive young scullion once. I started doing a bit of cooking of my own, unorthodox cooking, illicit cooking, a bit of real science, in fact. He was silent. What happened? Asked Helmholtz Watson. The controller sighed. Very nearly what's going to happen to you, young man. I was on the point of being sent to an island. The words galvanized Bernard into violent and unseemly activity. Send me to an island? He jumped up, ran across the room, and stood gesticulating in front of the controller. You can't send me. I haven't done anything. It was the others. I swear it was the others. He pointed accusingly to Helmholtz and the savage. Oh, please don't send me to Iceland. I promise I'll do whatever I ought to do. Give me another chance. Please give me another chance. The tears began to flow. I tell you, it's their fault, he sobbed. And not to Iceland. And in a paroxysm of abjection, he threw himself on his knees before the controller. Mustafa Mond tried to make him get up, but Bernard persisted in his groveling. The stream of words poured out inexhaustibly. In the end, the controller had to ring for his 4th secretary. Bring 3 men, he ordered, and take Mr. Marx into a bedroom. Give him a good soma vaporization, and then put him to bed and leave him. The 4th secretary went out and returned with 3 green-uniformed twin footmen. Still shouting and sobbing, Bernard was carried out. One would think he was going to have his throat cut, said the controller as the door closed. Whereas, if he had the smallest sense, he'd understand that his punishment is really a reward. He's being sent to an island. That's to say, he's being sent to a place where he'll meet the most interesting set of men and women to be found anywhere in the world. All the people who, for one reason or another, have got too self-consciously individual to fit into community life. All the people who aren't satisfied with orthodoxy, who've got independent ideas of their own. Everyone, in a word, who's anyone. I almost envy you, Mr. Watson. Helmholtz laughed. Then why aren't you on the island yourself? Because, finally, I preferred this, the controller answered. I was given the choice to be sent to an island where I could have got on with my pure science, or to be taken on to the controller's council with the prospect of succeeding in due course to an actual controllership. I chose this and let the science go. After a little silence, sometimes, he added, I'd rather regret the science. Happiness is a hard master, particularly other people's happiness. A much harder master if one isn't conditioned to accept it unquestioningly than truth. He sighed, fell silent again, then continued in brisker tone. Well, duty is duty. One can't consult one's own preference. I'm interested in truth. I like science. But truth's a menace. Science is a public danger, as dangerous as it's been beneficent. It has given us the stablest equilibrium in history. China's was hopelessly insecure by comparison. Even the primitive matriarchies weren't steadier than we are. Thanks, I repeat, to science. But we can't allow science to undo its own good work. That's why we so carefully limit the scope of its researches. That's why I almost got sent to an island. We don't allow it to deal with any but the most immediate problems of the moment. All other inquiries are most sedulously discouraged. It's curious, he went on after a little pause, to read what people in the time of our Ford used to write about scientific progress. They seem to have imagined that it could be allowed to go on indefinitely, regardless of everything else. Knowledge was the highest good, truth the supreme value, and the rest was secondary and subordinate. True, ideas were beginning to change even then. Our Ford himself did a great deal to shift the emphasis from truth and beauty to comfort and happiness. Mass production demanded the shift. Universal happiness keeps the wheel steadily turning. Truth and beauty can't. And, of course, whenever the masses seized political power, then it was happiness rather than truth and beauty that mattered. Still, in spite of everything, unrestricted scientific research was still permitted. People still went on talking about truth and beauty as though they were sovereign goods. Right up to the time of the 9 Years' War. That made them change their tune, all right. What's the point of truth or beauty or knowledge when the anthrax bombs are popping all around you? That was when science first began to be controlled, after the 9 Years' War. People were ready to have even their appetites controlled then, anything for a quiet life. We've gone on controlling ever since. It hasn't been very good for truth, of course, but it's been very good for happiness. One can't have something for nothing. Happiness has got to be paid for. You're paying for it, Mr. Watson, paying because you happen to be too much interested in beauty. I was too much interested in truth. I paid too. But you didn't go to an island, said the savage, breaking a long silence. The controller smiled. That's how I paid, by choosing to serve happiness, other people's, not mine. It's lucky, he added after a pause, that there are such a lot of islands in the world. I don't know what we should do without them. Put you all in a lethal chamber, I suppose. By the way, Mr. Watson, would you like a tropical climate? The Marquesa, for example, or Samoa, or something rather more bracing. Helmholtz rose from his pneumatic chair. I should like a thoroughly bad climate, he answered. I believe one would write better if the climate were bad. If there were a lot of wind and storms, for example. The controller nodded his approbation. I like your spirit, Mr. Watson. I like it very much indeed, as much as I officially disapprove of it, he smiled. What about the Falkland Islands? Yes, I think that will do, Helmholtz answered. And now, if you don't mind, I'll go and see how poor Bernard's getting on. And that's the end of chapter 16, which brings us to 17. Let's see. It's almost 58. It's almost time to say goodbye. So I guess we'll do chapter 17 next week. And after that, we might do Brave New World Revisited, which would give us more accurate. It's non-fiction, right? So that would be better. A lot of people in the chat. Awesome. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. That is, at least in the chat room, Captain Gringo, Del Nick, Mrs. Dan Defiant, hiya Donna. I see another Dan Cooper, and I see Grammy Mary. Hiya Grammy. I'll be listening in about 3 minutes or so. At rlmradio.xyz, check it out. And Grimner, hey, hello there. Nice to see you here. And Hopper, what's up, buddy? How you hopping along? Jane, hey there, hi. You doing all right there? Joe, Friday. I think from the whole list at this moment, I think I know you the longest, Joe. There's more people, like Road, for instance, JJ, a couple of more still around from long ago. Some people I know for like 8 or 9 years now or something. Juana Taco and Jules and Matty Clues. You ought to let me know what other sites you check out, Matty, because James Evan Pilato at Mixlr.media, no, not dot, Mixlr.com, mixlr.com/Media Monarchy. Check him out. Surely you just are you keeping website still up? And Vince closes together 3 small
secret societies, the secret oaths, and the secret proceedings.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
I think a new world order is emerging.
I'll see you guys next week. Take care.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of...
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening